Hello, and welcome to the Higher Enlightenment Podcast, brought to you by Higher Yields Cannabis Consulting, your seed to sale business solutions team. My name is Adam, part of the creative team here at Higher Yields, and today's episode, number 54, is about emerging markets and methods in Thailand and Germany and South Africa. So let's get on with the show. Well, we start with the self-introductions where you give us a little background on yourselves, and let's start with you, Dr. David.
Hello, I'm Professor David Katerere. So I'm co-director of the TUT CSIR Research Hub, which is specifically focused on cannabis, and it's based in Pretoria in South Africa.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. How about you, Yogesh?
Thank you, Adam, for having me here. I'm Yogesh. I run Buffalo Extraction Systems. We are a turnkey solution provider in the cannabis space, focusing on extraction, purification, and pre-processing technologies. Happy to be here today. Thanks.
Well, thanks for being here. How about you, Cory?
Cory Waggoner, CEO and founder of Higher Yields Consulting.
Okay, thank you. For the first question, let's start with South Africa. Doctor, this is where you're doing your research right now. Tell us what is going on out there.
Lots going on. We consider ourselves to be quite progressive in terms of the medical cannabis, hemp, as well as recreational cannabis space. So at the moment, the two things that are going on are mostly in industrial hemp, where we now have over 400 licenses that have been given out. And then in terms of medical cannabis, we have about 99 licensed farms. So we ourselves are in the extraction business, and part of it is really to de-risk farmers who are going into this business. So yeah, everything seems to be gaining traction, and we are learning every day.
So what impact do you see the work in South Africa having on the global cannabis market?
Well, we have the sun out here, so we have good conditions, climate. I think the regulations are now at least being sorted out to facilitate the growth of this industry. So we are already seeing people exporting into European markets, and in Southern Africa, as you may know, Lesotho was a pioneer in this space. So we work not just in South Africa, but across the region. So Lesotho, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia has just come on board. So it's early days, but we do anticipate that with good investments into the value chain, that this region will be able to contribute to the global cannabis industry and to the supply, but also to create jobs that are sustainable and just generally have an empowered industry in the region.
What do new and established cannabis businesses need to know about opportunities for growth in South Africa?
First of all, labor is much cheaper here. And I think the issue might be importing, setting up, but we do have quite a lot of good engineering companies, good companies that would be able to support investors, at least on setting up the grow operations. And then we are in collaboration with different vendors, like with our facility, for instance. We work with a really good company that has been able to assist us to set up our CO2 extraction, and they do all sorts of other post-setup support. But in terms of getting into the market, it's to understand the regulations. So there is a licensing fee for medical cannabis, and then it's also tied to offtakes. So that's one of the biggest challenges, that you actually need an offtake from day one for you to get approval. There's also quite a bit of funding in the market, but again, it's tied to offtakes. So I guess working with locals and with the tribal knowledge that locals have and collaborating with those locals is probably going to save any foreign investor too much time and pain and headaches.
Prof, it's interesting how everybody looks at South Africa being the center for research and any technology in the southern part of the continent. How do you see this evolving? Because I see a lot of these hubs that are coming up across the region where you are empowering people and there is different activities, if you want to elaborate on that.
Yes. So our sort of hub model is centered within the private sector. Well, it's centered within the public sector. So we have the university, and then we have Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR. So we are very strong on the research side of things. And what I think we are interested in doing is, number one, train other people and handhold them into this space up to a point where they are profitable, and then they can also maybe invest in their own facilities in terms of extraction facilities. And then, of course, product formulation. So because we come from a pharmaceutical background, we also want to assist entrepreneurs who are interested in the value add part of it. So once we've done the extraction, what happens to the product? At the moment, we are not seeing enough homegrown products. What we're doing is we are exporting raw flour, and then we are importing finished products. So that's why we are being strategic to say that we want to be in this space to unlock all the value locally, and then be able to export some of that out of or into the region and also out of the continent.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's kind of an export deficit in terms of the industry, where we are saying that we have all the capabilities and the rising sun always there. But I think the industry is yet to evolve to a point that we are self-sustaining as a domestic market, if I'm not wrong, and be able to export a lot of compliant finished product. So on those lines, I mean, is South Africa lined up enough to do compliant products to Europe? I know like we have a good synergy of Europeans and Englishmen working out of Africa, and there's a lot of exports. Are we positioned well enough to do compliant flour and API, bulk API? Because I see Europe will never have that scale and that cost saving that they can achieve here.
Yes, so I think those are the sort of selling points for the region. The fact that we have good climatic conditions, and there's also discussion now about actually growing some of this outside, so that you actually utilize the insulation that we have in the region. Good climatic conditions, labor is relatively cheap. And then, of course, the forex. So for let's say for $1, you're getting 20 rands. So there is good bang for buck in the region. And then logistics. So from a logistical point of view, we're on the same timeline with Central Europe. So we and there are direct flights out of South Africa into European markets. However, I think one of the biggest criticism of a lot of the policies, the African policies around cannabis, is the fact that they're export oriented. Because at the end of the day, we have to think of cannabis as medicine, So we are interested in creating access to medicine for our own African patients as well, and that's where the formulation technologies and enabling legislation comes in.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think that's a great point. I'm unaware of the policy side of things, but I think Cory, on the US side of things, because you come from a very, very evolved market, the second up right after Canada, but the biggest, I think America is, correct me if I'm wrong, is it above 80% of the world cannabis market? How do you see that certain lessons from America can be incorporated into a nascent market like Africa to pick up from and be able to become a net exporter?
Yeah.
I know you have good policy experience as well.
Yeah, well, in America, and we have so many different rules and regulations because each state's different. We're not federally legalized here. I think what we've learned in America and what I've learned in Africa over the last 5 or 6 years of doing some work there is, first, what's the end game? Where is this product headed? Because we need to know what certifications and what standards it needs to meet in order to make sure that we can actually sell the product at the end. I feel like a lot of times people just, we can produce X amount and assume that it's going to kind of sell itself. But the hardest part in the early years in Africa was being able to get the product out, get it out of Africa and get it into other places. So I think that's a big one. The other one is just operationally, how you're setting up these businesses and not overbuilding, not underbuilding.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, and where the end product's going to go, and how much that product you're going to be able to sell. And as you guys know, there's a lot of groups out there that they don't want to spend any money on their cultivation or extraction until they have purchase orders in place. But nobody is going to put a purchase order in place for something that doesn't exist yet, or that they don't know, and has so much kind of variability in how it's created. And then third, the programs that are being created. Something we've seen here in the US is we have some of these programs like Oklahoma where it's extremely progressive and it's so simple to get into, but very quickly it becomes saturated. And then we have other states where it's very limited and the program was created for only the rich, basically. And so they come in and they own one of 6 licenses in a state with 15 million people. And so those things have kind of created totally different markets here. And it's been interesting to watch them because the smaller programs, they're easier to regulate. And when the programs are easy to regulate, it's easier to make sure that the standards are being withheld versus a program with 10,000 license holders and only 700,000 people in the state, where there's no way they're ever going to get their arms around that, and things are making it to the market that shouldn't be. So really interesting to see how Africa's evolved over the last 5-6 years, and how these programs are starting to develop and how people are approaching the business. And yeah, as far as the tribes and kind of the local governments, as Doctor said, those are huge and those are important. Myself, I can't go down to Lesotho and get done what needs to be done. You have to have those local contacts in Africa to be able to really get things moving and get things accomplished. So it's a really interesting market. It's a really exciting time. There are some really great advantages to being down there, but there's also some tricky things that you have to be prepared for and kind of be thinking ahead on, for sure.
Well, that's great perspective, Cory. Thanks for that. I like your niceness around telling us and the industry to not overinvest, and how you put it, that we should not overinvest and overbuild, which leads to learning some lessons from the West that we certainly can from Cannabis 1.0. So yeah, I think that's a great one, that we don't do that. But apart from recreational, I mean, we leave recreational apart for US and Canada. Say bulk API or pharmaceutical products. Where does Africa have a stance? If Doc and Cory and Adam, if you guys want to talk on that, is how do we make nascent countries, what information can we provide them so they can become like exporters of APIs? And this not just from a policy standpoint, but also from a compliance standpoint and a pricing standpoint, because I know that every industry that begins in each state from the US will go through 3 bust cycles as soon as it opens up. There'll be a boom in flower, bust in flower, boom in flower, bust in flower. They do products and the industry commoditizes itself. So off to you guys to have a quick, and Adam, you can pitch in. Sorry for stealing the vibe here, but I wanted to get this before we jump on to other regions. Please, off to you guys.
I think, again, having that end buyer And what we see in the market, Yogesh, and where people work, where we really work with our clients is really kind of in that precision medicine, right? So we collect a lot of data on people's DNA, cannabis profiles, and we're starting to track those things a lot closer to see how certain profiles are helping people. You know, for years it was all about who grew the best Blue Dream, who grew the best sour diesel. But if we go and look at David's sour diesel, Cory's sour diesel, and Yogesh's sour diesel, they're totally different. So what really matters at the end is kind of that profile. And if we can start to link that and really build brands off of those profiles and target specific demographics of individuals with specific DNA, we're going to have a better impact. And you're going to have something that's more sought after, more consistent, more in line with what you expect with something pharmaceutical that you're putting in your body, that you're going to get a consistent effect or impact from it. That's difficult though in cannabis because it's horticulture and you're growing something each time, and these genetics, they change. Their profiles can change a little bit. Their potencies can change. Their yields can change based on the climate and the controls that are in place. So for us, while we don't want to overbuild and invest that way, definitely want to invest in technology, because once you have those controls in place and you have the system in place, you start to cut out some of the variables of what can happen, and then it's more streamlined when you're bringing the genetics in, because after you run it what you're going to get out on the other side and how to hone in on that consistency. So I think for us, that's a lot of what we're seeing in the market is, obviously quality, quantity, these things will always be important, but how do we get more precise? How do we get more consistent? And how do we find the right demographic? Because I think that's the other things. Everybody looks at the market and they're like, they see kind of how the product blends look for consumers, and they look at that big product number and they're like, well, we want to own 1% of this 50%, but you don't need to. In Colorado, there's $12 million a month in unbranded pre-rolls sold. And there's all these very small cultivations that are struggling to just sell raw biomass. But putting that in a branded tube, starting to target that market, all of a sudden they can't make enough. They've got to go outside of that. So again, I just think it's really important to make sure that people are investing in technology and the right technology to create that consistency. And they're really starting at the end of the line and knowing who their buyer is going to be, knowing who they're trying to market to. And because that's also, where we're at with the industry, there's not a lot of that. I mean, there is, but there isn't. A majority of it isn't. And there are some people that are pushing towards that, but that's where I believe it's going. And that's where I believe it's heading, whether it's precision medicine or what we call on the adult use side, precision marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess from, the African side of things, I think it's how to build the industry, right? So we actually need to be able to understand the value chain, and most people need to do that, and then to work from an area of strength and also where their skill set is. I mean, I remember we were in Lesotho and in this meeting, and none of those people had actually met before, and they all thought they were competing against each other. But when you started these conversations to say, actually, what are your capabilities? Where are you in the value chain? You actually found that they needed each other. So, being able to build these networks of people, the market is too big for any one person, really. That's what we also have to realize, and have that abundance mentality, kind of thing. So that's the one thing, because once you start to look at the value chain, then you start to look at or you start to see opportunities. For instance, on the growing side, there are opportunities there to be able to supply seeds and all types of seeds that would be required, particularly seeds that are certified. But also talking about genetics, Cory, then you need to think about the land races, because there's also this fear around here that we've had cannabis grow in Africa for probably the past 500-600 years, and it also now has its own unique genetics. So are we looking at also certifying that genetics and not losing it, because biopiracy is an issue. So there are people working on that side of things. And then a little bit further up the value chain, that's where maybe you can start to look at testing services, testing the soil. Those are great opportunities, right? Soil testing, testing the actual seed, testing the biomass, and then going on to actually providing testing services for the extracts and the formulated products. And then, the extraction that we've been talking about, which I think we are finding that the opportunity is there to train young people, to bring young people in, but also to be able to not just do cannabis, but also maybe extract other complementary products that can go and be co-formulated with cannabis. And this is one of the advantages of South Africa, because we are a highly biodiverse country. So not only do we have, our own strains of cannabis, but we also have a lot of plant species here that don't occur anywhere else in the world. And therefore, this is an opportunity for building really nice co-formulated products, right? And then, of course, going further in the value chain, we are not really seeing enough on the retail side at the moment in terms of, dispensaries that are organized, regulated, and working with, within the confines of the law. So that's another space that's going to have to open up, either within the retail pharmacy sector or as standalone. So yeah, I'll stop there for now.
I think that's amazing perspective from two sides of a very mature market and somewhere where we are laying the building blocks. And there's a lot of lessons that one can learn from each other to make sure that South Africa as a country can play its cards very carefully and not make any mistakes that were made in the past. And Doc, to your point, I feel that the kind of experience Africa has on traditional medicine, that's also way stronger than any other continent, because they've been using cannabis as part of medicine for a long time. It may not have been clinically tried, but any comments on that end, Doc? I mean, what is the usage of cannabis as a medicine already in this space? And this we are talking on not OTC, but this is alternative schools of medicine.
The traditional setup. Yeah. No, so it is a key component of many traditional healing systems in the world. As you know, even traditional Chinese medicine would tend to use hemp and cannabis. Ayurveda, it's really big in Indian Ayurvedic medicines. And then, of course, within African traditional systems, it is used for spiritual ceremonies, but also just for treating various ailments, mostly looking at maybe asthma, asthmatic conditions, respiratory conditions. But there are also ways of handling the cannabis. So we have some research that we are looking at where we are actually trying to look at traditional ways of handling cannabis, which made it more potent. So that's hence you have things like Durban poison, which is actually an interesting genetic, which is last I checked is actually being sold by a Dutch company. And then of course you have the Swazi gold and the Malawi gold, and so there are lots of interesting ways in which they would post-harvest treatment before they actually used it. I think the biggest challenge there is the fact that in South Africa alone, it's estimated there are about 900,000 farmers whom we call legacy farmers. So these are farmers that were growing cannabis illegally for probably the past 100 years. Now, how do you bring those people into a pharmaceutical value chain, which is a very, very regulated and regimented way of doing things? You can't have pesticides. The soil has to be tested. All of those things. So it's something that people talk about. There are lots of political promises, but it's nigh impossible, because I always say I've not seen a peasant farmers anywhere in the world getting into a pharmaceutical value chain. Yeah. So a solution to that might be to turn them into hemp farmers rather, so where they are growing industrial hemp, which can be eaten or goes into the food value chain, can also go into sort of fiber, industrial products, those kind of things. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing. Off to you, Adam. Sorry, I wanted to put these two questions in before we move.
No, that's great.
Trim it as needed.
Okay, for you, Yogesh, what's going on in Thailand, and what do you find most interesting about it?
So I think it was, let me see, it's Thailand. I think it was in June 2022 that Thailand legalized cannabis recreationally and medicinally. The laws were kind of open and a little bit in the gray. The market since June 2022 skyrocketed, whether be it in terms of illicit cannabis, legal use, recreational, medicinal companies doing research. I think it was this light of hope that ASEAN was hoping for a long time, that somebody takes the first step, and Thailand, as a country, was brave enough to do that. So there has been a lot of move in terms of the only place in the ASEAN and even Central Asia and Asia Pacific to go to for recreational use. So in terms of recreational, I think it's the only spring break destination around here that kids want to visit because it's completely legal to do that. Safety, however, I think safe adult use, I think, is something that Thailand, with its new government at the moment, is trying to fine-tune the laws in terms of safety of the stuff that's been grown. Compliance is underway. There is, I would say, an absence of a comprehensive legal framework governing cannabis use, but there are strong stakeholders that are driving that currently, and we should see something that comes in the way very soon. So I think reflecting on the policy journey, I think it's getting there, but it's the strongest player at the moment in this region.
So it just seems like to me, and I'm not super familiar with Thailand, but been keeping up with a little bit. Seems like the regulations, similar to the example I used of Oklahoma, like locally, it's very easy to kind of get involved in the industry, and which for a place like Thailand, I would think would be good for the local economy to be able to open that up quickly to create the jobs, create the tax revenues. But on the bigger scale, does it hinder when they're not creating that framework, or they're not kind of working compliance first, and it's more kind of industry business first, and being able to get the product out of Thailand?
You mean as a net a product out for exports to other countries?
Yeah.
So I think there is. I think there is one way to look at it from the lens of compliances, whereas the past year it has seen an explosion on the domestic market, and this we are talking up to, I think, between 8,000 to 9,000 dispensaries, which has gone across the number of 7-Elevens in the country. And this includes medicinal as well as recreational stuff at these dispensaries. From an export standpoint, I feel the prices are so high at the moment that they wouldn't have buyers. I think I hear other things around them importing stuff from Canada. I'm not sure how that works, but that's been out in the news, which I read recently. So from an export standpoint, to answer your question largely, they are looking at compliances, but I don't think it's economically feasible for them to export yet because they have a very strong domestic market.
Yeah, maybe if I may just add the latest news, which is actually coming from the Thai Prime Minister, who's in New York at the moment, is that within the next 6 months, they are probably going to stop the recreational side of things, and just focus on medical cannabis. There's just an article now in The Guardian, which I shared earlier today, and this is what they're saying. They're making a U-turn. because the whole recreational space was apparently operating outside of any legislative framework because there wasn't any. And now there's this new government which actually campaigned on the back of undoing the whole recreational space. So what I think will be interesting there is the dynamics of that globally, because I know that South Africa was starting to lose business as a result of the flower, I think, coming from Thailand at some point into European markets. And so now that, Thailand might in the next 6 months be out as a potential supplier into European markets, how is that going to pan out for, say, South American growers and then African growers?
So, Doc, if they take a U-turn here and say recreational is curtailed, I feel economically they would get a big dent there, because it had already started to become a big part of tourism for them.
Yeah.
Any comments on that? And also, like, how do you see them on lines of research as compared to, say, South Africa or India or Germany? I mean, what's your take on that? I know you are connected to all academic institutions around the country. Do you see good clinical trials and research or good pharmaceutical products coming out of there?
Yeah, I think Germany is certainly very interesting, because I was at a conference in Ireland not too long ago where there were German researchers presenting work on the use of cannabis, particularly in terminal cancers. It seems that they are able to get ethical approval for a lot of these kind of trials, which sometimes is difficult in our circumstances. There's also quite a bit of funding going on into these commercial trials. And then I think the Germanic tradition, because Germany and the sort of Germanic Europe, if you like, Austria, parts of Switzerland and Germany, they are very strong on phytotherapies, and they do lots of interesting clinical research, and they're able to shepherd these products into the marketplace. So unlike Ireland, for instance, in Ireland, they don't even have Epidiolex. They have it, but you cannot get the National Health Service to pay for it. And I realized that in England recently, there's also a pushback around cannabis-based medicines. So I think that's going well. In South Africa, there are people looking at trials, but the funding is always a problem. And then trying to navigate the whole, sort of all the ethical barriers and be able to do something that's, ethically approved does take time. But we have good research institutions here, and if we're able to provide evidence-based medicines, I think that there would be quite a big market in the region. You're talking about 200 million people in this region, and then 1.4 across the Africa region. So that's a big population.
Totally, Doc. So I think so for Thailand at a larger space, it's going to be a wait and watch game and see what results on this U-turn policy. Thanks for informing on that. I'm going to read up on that.
Could you guys expand a bit on what's going on in Germany and the impact on global market?
Cory, you want to take this one first?
Yeah. So the EU's been a very interesting place to watch over the last couple of years. Last year, we're getting really excited because it seemed like, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, kind of the big players in this arena, we're all starting to work together and saying, hey, we need to be smart about how we create these so we don't end up with the same problem that the US has, where when people cross the border and they can have a certain amount here, but they can't have that amount here. We're not creating problems for this program. There's a lot of discussions around, this needs to be a full paradigm shift in our thinking of this product as a drug versus now a recreational product that we can use. And they were really focused on creating a well-established program that was able to track product that was going to make it to market and ensure safety of that product. And last year, though, things have changed quite a bit. They've kind of gone back to this idea, and it's really frustrating because we've kind of seen this already in the U.S. and how it doesn't work. And they're looking to allow certain people to come through and acquire commercial licenses, which will be held to completely different standards than people who want to be home growers and bring their product to social clubs. We had this here in the U.S. with caregivers, and it just created a lot of issues. And honestly, there's a lot of issues that we are not aware that it created, because as we learn more about testing, as things become more kind of streamlined and consistent across the markets as far as how products actually get approved to come to market, it doesn't seem like some of those things are going to be in place, and some of the things are working through. And there's a lot of concern, I think, from our organization that this is really going to slow down progress, because now they had momentum moving in the right direction. Now they've halted that momentum, and now they're looking at these other directions that we've seen fail time and time again, and really put the consumer in danger. And for us at Higher Yields, it's our two biggest concerns as we approach markets is, one, we got to make sure the product that makes it to the consumer is safe. It's good product. We know what's in it. We know how it's created, and we know there's nothing that's going to be harmful to them in the product. And the second one is making sure we look out for the businesses, and we don't have so many licenses that they can't compete, they can't keep up, and that things just become saturated, because that's no good for the businesses and the entrepreneurs that start them. So not the greatest update out of Germany, but Germany it's the big domino to fall in the EU, and they have their medical program, and it's pretty strict, pretty thin amount of operators and importers and things like that. So it's a big one, but it's not there yet, and not really sure when it's going to get there, but seems like it's going to take a little bit longer than what we anticipated last year.
Yeah, so there seems
Absolutely.
to be a trend of things going backwards.
Yeah, a little bit. And it's, I think, like, me having started in California and then coming to Colorado, you kind of get it, because there's this legacy mentality of, all these growers wanted it to be illegal so the cops would leave them alone. But now that it's legal, now the government's got rules that they have to follow, and they don't want to follow the rules. And so they're just kind of constantly trying to figure out ways to work around, those sort of things. Or for years, that's what they did. And slowly but surely, Colorado, California, they slowed down the caregivers, because back in the day, and I was a caregiver for a little while, and we're always looking for loopholes. There was a time that we had more plants in our greenhouses than most licensed cultivations did in Colorado. And there's nothing illegal about how we were growing it or how we were operating those facilities, because we had all of the paperwork that we're required to have. But since we were caregivers, we didn't have to have cameras. We didn't have to track seed to sale. We didn't have to have things tested. We didn't have to tell people where we sold the products in. We had to tell people where the genetics came from, versus the operators who, had to spend boatloads of money on security, on licensing, on compliance, on seed to sale tracking, on testing. And it just creates, this kind of unfair advantage. But also it's kind of where the industry came from. We were pushed into this black market for years. There was a lot of unverified research that there was medical, there was opportunities to help people from a medicinal standpoint. And for the last 15 years, I feel like the industry as a whole, we've been trying to kind of overcome these stigmas of, who the operators are. They're not all these like dumb potheads. There are some very intelligent people. There's some very driven people, very passionate people in this industry that are very focused on creating a great product, a consistent product, a safe product. It's not what it was 10, 15 years ago. And same with the product. years ago, like reefer madness, you're going to smoke a joint and let your baby go swim in the pool without you. Like, it was just kind of craziness. And it's taken a long time, I think, to overcome that. And what's probably been the most helpful was CBD in the early years of, how it was helping children, how it was helping people with seizures, how it was helping people with cancer, because that really kind of started to change kind of the end of the line with the older demographic, who had those older ideas of what cannabis was and how bad it was, and it was such a terrible drug, and it was a gateway drug, and first cannabis, then heroin. And so that's where we started to kind of see the shift, and we're in a lot better place now. But again, when we look at Germany, it's like, well, we kind of know what battles, if this moves forward the way that they're saying it will right now, there's just going to be a lot of battles, and there's going to be a lot of unsafe product, untested product on the market. And there's probably going to be a lot of issues with the businesses, that are doing things right, that are compliant, that do have cameras, that do have security, trying to compete with, small growers who have very little overhead, and have 5 or 6 lights in their basement.
Okay, we're just about out of questions. Does anybody have any final thoughts or things they'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think investing in African markets, having heard all the barriers that Cory was alluding to, the African markets are much simpler in a sense. And then, of course, like we said, trying to actually create access for local patients. So I'll give you an example of cancer. In Africa, cancer is diagnosed much earlier than anywhere else. It's also much more aggressive because it would have been diagnosed late. And we don't have good pain killing and also palliative care, right? There's very low access to palliative medicines, and even that whole palliative service. But what can we then do? We certainly can use cannabis-based medicines which are of good quality to be able to assist these patients. And we know that cannabis is superior to the opioids because you don't really have to escalate the dose. Addiction is not scientifically proven. That means we know that there will be no addiction. But in any case, these are patients on palliative care. I think one of the biggest advantages is just that they are more alert. They can go about their lives without this kind of zombie effect that you would get by using opiates. And then all the other side effects, constipation, nausea, which just adds to some of the nausea that comes out of some, chemotherapies and things like that. So I think if there was a from an investment standpoint, but also from the African researcher standpoint, if there were concerted efforts to push for these medicines to actually be available, and for the regulator to enable that they are available, because we have enough clinical evidence from various trials to actually justify being able to do market authorization on good products. And that's one of the areas that we're working with a couple of private companies, different formulations, but specifically really aimed at this area of need, which is cancer. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Doc. This is great information around how the market should be, how we should be looking at the industry. And then just to add to that, I think it's quite a transformative era for cannabis as a crop for the world. And I know the world is following the footsteps of the West. I think there's very diverse opinions around policy. And I think the take that Europe is moving towards is a very, very calibrated and a safe and slow approach. So I think there is right and wrong around the sides of the economics of business, but in terms of their perspective around public safety, I think it's all for themselves. I think what as an industry, I think whether be it Africa, Germany, the US, or Thailand, or India for that matter, now that we are moving towards legalization, I think it's ought to look for to solve problems at the largest level and to make sure that the products that are going through our channels are safe for use and compliant, and take compliance into consideration when we are talking to businesses or research on that end, or solving the world's biggest ailments like cancer, as Prof mentioned. So just a few lines on that end from me. Thank you so much, guys, for having me on.
Well, thanks for being here, all of you gentlemen. It's been very informative.
Kind of close us out, Adam. It's a really exciting time in cannabis, especially in the international space. But as you know, any listener of this podcast probably can deduct from this, is it's very complex, it's very complicated. And having professionals like David and Yogesh on your team, and some of the team members from Higher Yields is really crucial to that success. And I see up in Yogesh's right corner there, we build ecosystems. Your ecosystem, and I think David hit on this, is going to be huge. As you get in this isn't something that you can do on your own and be very successful if you don't have experience in this industry. There's regulatory changes, there's facility requirements, there's lab testing and profiles and DNA and branding and customs and export and import. There's just so many different hats that you have to wear, and it's really important to have a strong ecosystem and to have good partners and trusted advisors as you're getting into this.
Hey, well, thanks again, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Well, hey, safe travels, and nice to meet you. And Yogesh, thanks for bringing another great member to the ecosystem here, and good to see you again.
Likewise. Yeah, thanks, Cory. Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.